Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Health Wealth podcast for what is one of the best and most interesting episodes that we've ever done. This week, I sit down with Mike Collins, who is the sugar free man, and we explore the often overlooked world of sugar addiction. Mike shares his deeply personal journey of overcoming sugar dependency, starting with childhood habits that shaped his relationship with sweets, and the pivotal role that this played in raising his own children sugar free. This conversation takes a deep dive into the biological effects of sugar, its addictive properties, and the challenges of eliminating it from modern diets. Whether you're curious about detox strategies, raising sugar free kids, or just learning how to navigate the food industry's hidden sugars, this episode offers actionable advice and a new perspective on living a healthier, sugar free life. Now, let's get on and enjoy the episode. So, Mike, great to have you on the show. Why don't you just give us a little introduction to yourself?
Thanks, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me. So this whole sugar thing started like a generation ago, really. My mom was my favorite sugar junkie, and kind of tragic. But her mother died. My grandma died when she was only 8 years old, and they owned a country store across the way. The family did, and they had to move in with my great aunt, who was not the nicest person in the world, and my grandfather and her. She was the last child. And my grandmother was only 48 years old. It was kind of wild. But anyway, when anytime she walked into that store, my grandfather made a deal with his cousin Jim that she could have anything she wanted, just put it on his tab. So the only thing she wanted at 8 years old was candy, right? And so she kind of grew up that candy was love. And I grew up that way, right? She really believed that. And I think today, a lot of people still believe that. They believe that baking for people and candy and like when I raised a couple sugar-free kids and I got arguments all the time with schools and the grand friends' parents because they literally, and they said it to me, they thought I was depriving them of a childhood, right? So anyway, I mean, I just grew up covered up with every kind of candy. It was like my mother was our favorite supplier, because she was feeding her own habit, right? And so fast forward, I got sober at 28 years old. I quit drinking alcohol and drugs and everything, and I just wanted to get healthy. And so I read a book called Sugar Blues, and Sugar Blues was written by a guy named William Duffy, and William Duffy eventually married the famous movie star Gloria Swanson. It was wild, and they really promoted that book pretty heavily. And I don't know, it just stuck in my mind. I really wanted to get healthy. So somehow I talked my wife at the time into having these, my boys were twins, no flour, no sugar, no caffeine while she was pregnant. And then it lasted till they were about 6 years old. And then we just couldn't do it anymore. We couldn't fight anymore. We couldn't, they were an outside birthday party. It was a roller skating rink, and we just gave in. So the next day we resolved, we regained our resolve. But at the end of the day, they really only had sugar at those outside birthdays parties for the rest of their life, or the rest of their childhood. And so anyway, like they said, Dad, you should write a book because their childhood was kind of different, like they just like they had to live this kind of belief that I had. And if I told you the story about my boys, I mean, you just wouldn't believe it. You think I was lying or bragging or both. I just do believe that their brain developed better, and we'll talk about that more. Um, but I was kind of semi-retired. I bought sugaraddiction.com like in '09, and I put it out. Didn't really do much with it, put out good information, but at the end of the day, it really wasn't until I was kind of geared up, I was semi-retired just before the pandemic. I was coaching and I started putting really good information out, and I started running online support groups. So I was kind of geared up. And then when the pandemic hit, all hell broke loose. I mean, it was just insane. People were, obviously you've seen the stories of the grocery stores being bought out of sugar and flour, and they were baking and candy and sodas, and people were gaining weight. And another part is they were on Zoom. Like for the first time, families, everybody was on Zoom. And so I was all ready for this. So that's when the business kind of took off. And and ever since, I mean, I've just been covered up. We just recently got approved by National Board of Health and Wellness Coaches for um, for our program, which is crazy successful. And here's the main thing, I it's very different than people believe. My recovery from alcohol and drugs, and 20 of those years I spent helping drug addicts and alcoholics get sober. And really, what has happened is that this is identical. I do these quit sugar summits where I've interviewed over 400 of the world's leading experts every January. And what what's happened now is the science is there to prove that sugar is as powerful a drug uh, as anything. I mean, it literally can tamp down your feelings, your emotions. There's a very common construct in the world of alcohol and drugs that if you started using alcohol and drugs at 14 or 15, you stop growing emotionally, right? And when people come to me, 20% of them are crying because they've tried so hard for many, many years. These are accomplished people, doctors, lawyers, therapists, millionaires. I mean, people that can do anything in life, an Olympic athlete, they can do anything, but they cannot seem to put this sugar down, right? And they're just not making the connection that the science is now proving, like tobacco, that this was and is something that humans should not. Right? So anyway, that's the kind of short version of how I got here. I can, like I said, it probably answers or brings up more questions than it answers, but that's the short version. That's the podcast version.
Yeah, yeah. You got to try and fit it all in. That's what did you find when you went sugar free yourself? What was
Yeah.
that like? Was that a difficult time?
Good question. So, in the early days, my fellows in recovery from alcohol and drugs, they were not interested in this, right? And nobody was talking about this, and food groups were not very organized or very new at that time. There weren't very many of them. And so it took me like 3 years, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Like, I knew in the early days that caffeine was bothering me. It was giving me anxiety. I was drinking like 8 Mountain Dews a day. Think
Yeah.
about it. Like the highest back then, this is before energy drinks, the highest caffeinated beverage on the market. And so I quit caffeine and but I was drinking like full sugar soda still, like Sprite and 7 Up, stuff that didn't have sugar caffeine in it. And then that started bothering me. So I'm back and forth with another year, and then back and forth with the flour and the pasta and stuff. Um, and so it took me a long time. And I couldn't tell you. I could tell you the day I got sober, but I could not tell you the day that I actually got sugar free. I just don't know. It was all kind of a blur over
Mm.
a couple of year period. I would start every morning, like everybody does that talks with me. They start every morning. I'm going to do it today. Today's going to be the day. And then by the end of the day, you're back into sugar or whatever. And so that's kind of where, that's how I got off it. And I just didn't have any assistance. My friends were not interested. They said, Mike, are you sober? I'm like, yeah, I'm sober, but forget about the sugar. Just. And here I was, and I love them. Don't get me wrong. They saved my life. But in the back of the room of support groups is freaking covered up with candy, sugar, cakes,
Yeah.
coffee. It's like, and then they're outside smoking cigarettes too. And but when I started, they were smoking cigarettes in the meetings.
Mm.
So it was like just all the legal drugs at recovery meetings. So anyway,
Yeah.
it's my story is I hope to save people those 3 years. Hopefully they can do it in 3 months or 3 weeks.
Yeah.
So,
What did you find that sugar was harder to quit than the alcohol and the drugs?
so I don't know if you like watched any of my other stuff online, if I've ever said this, or I've said it a million times, but so because of my um openness, about my drug and alcohol recovery, which I believe in. I think anonymity is dead and people should be talking about because this is a healthcare issue, not a moral
Mm.
issue. But at the end of the day, I attract a lot of recovering alcoholics and drug addicts. And to a man, to a woman, every single one of them has said sugar was harder. And
Wow.
I had the same experience. Those 3 years was just like a nightmare. Like it was like so frustrating. And I can understand the people why the 20% of them are crying when they call me is because they've struggled. So and these are addiction savvy people. These are people who know who've quit heroin, who've quit alcohol. They're very savvy, but they cannot get off the sugar. And that's what has, in my heart and my soul has given me this belief, became the sugar-free man and dedicated the rest of my life to it, is because people are struggling out there. There's a lot of pain out there, and it's harder than people think, and it's not what people think.
Mm.
Everybody's been brainwashed by this diet industry. Eat less, exercise more, right? And it's just not, it doesn't work. That's not the process of what diets say, which is quit the white stuff, reduce the white stuff. So yeah, it's harder, I believe, and personally, and my folks have kind of proved that out, that it's harder to quit, I believe, sugar
Yeah.
than anything else.
Yeah, definitely. Can you talk us through some of what is it that sugar does to our bodies? Can you talk us through a little bit of that to kind of give people an overview of what's happening when they're taking in all this sugar?
Yeah, so I mentioned it a little earlier, and I want to kind of stress it. It takes about the arc of a podcast to kind of understand what is actually going on, right? So people have cravings, which cravings and denial, but cravings, two big thought problems that I have in that I still struggle with and try and get to the bottom of is most easily explained by the structure of the brain, okay? And this is a brain illness, okay? This is a brain, it's a dopamine dysregulation problem. And so when I say dopamine, everybody kind of knows now because it's been popularized, but I mean dopamine, serotonin, norepinephrine, GABA, oxytocin, adrenal glands, endorphins, cannabinoid receptors. Every brain and body receptor and reward system in your body is affected by sugar. Mostly, dopamine's a big part of it. And so you're not looking for a sweet, when you have a craving, you're not looking for a sweet taste on your tongue. What you're looking for is, remember I told you that, it's very common in alcohol and drugs that you are tamping down your emotions, right? You're not maturing emotionally if you're a drug addict or an alcoholic. You started using at 14 or 15 and your life's a mess. Everything's because you never solved any problems. You never worked through any emotions, okay? Now extrapolate that back to when you're 3 or 4, probably in the womb, but 3 or 4, and you kind of get this message that your mother's busy. She doesn't have time. She's got other kids. She got a job. And so, when you're upset, she'll give you a cookie and send you to the TV. And your little brain registers worry, sugar, fear, sugar, hurt, pain, even physical pain, sugar, right? And it is an anesthetist. It has the ability to anesthetize feelings. This is where this misnomer of the emotional eating came from. This is where comfort food, because there's a segment of the marketplace or the segment of the help industry that believes that you can change your emotional life if you're an emotional eater, if you're overweight or whatever, by cutting back on this stuff, this comfort food or this sugar and flour, right? Because they're overweight and they start to work very diligently on their emotional issues, which is great. But the problem is moderation for about a third of the population doesn't work. It's like biochemically, the scientific term is that their dopamine receptors are downregulated. They're thinned out. They have less of them. This is a proven back, you can slide people in MRI and see it, okay? And what has to happen for about a third of people, they have to literally get some abstinence. They've got to shut down the neural pathway that was grooved for this self-soothing, okay? And when they change that, they have to build another one. There's not a lot of scientific fact that these regenerate, okay? But there is a lot of scientific proof that you can build new neural pathways. And when you build new neural pathways minus the sugar, you have this thing that you need to work through. Could be your boyfriend breaking up with you, it could be a death of a parent, it could be anything that you never really developed the tools to work through, right? And you have stunted that growth, that emotional. People come to me, no exaggeration, with 20 years of talk therapy. They've gone to the therapist, they've worked on their emotional issues, and then they undo it at the store on the way home, at the 7-Eleven, at the candy store on the way home. Because you can't like get over the death of a parent or the breakup of a marriage or whatever the chaos was when you were young. You can't get over that in like 55 minutes. You know, it got days, weeks, months, sometimes years to work through the grief and the pain and the worry and the fear. And when you stunt it and blunt it every day with sugar, you're just not moving forward. The common refrain when people get to about day 15 or day 20, when they've never had a freedom from this crutch is, Mike, I'm losing my mind. Like, because they just don't have the tools to self-soothe themselves. They don't have a walking practice or a meditation practice or a yoga practice or a prayer practice. They just don't um, understand what's going on with them. And it takes a little bit of time and some group support and some coaching to get them to understand. It's not that they need to exercise so that they burn calories. That's been debunked. It's not a true statement anymore. It doesn't work. You only exercise to help your emotional life be better. Anyway, I get rambling on about this stuff, but hopefully that answers your question. I forgot even the question, but hopefully.
No, definitely it did. It gave us a lot of insight into what sugar does to us, and,
Yeah.
and and why we need to be avoiding it. I guess another important thing is that I think a lot of people, I don't know if you find this as well, but a lot of people don't realize how many foods are sugar. We associate it with sweet treats and things, don't we? But we don't realize how many other foods actually contain sugar.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, 85% of or 80 plus 80, 79.9, it's a lot. It's 80% solid of the things in the grocery store contain sugar in it. They have sugar in it. And this didn't happen when you and I were young. Definitely when I was young. I might be a little older than you, but at the end of the day, it's like this was a phenomena that started in the 80s when high fructose corn syrup came into the marketplace. And it's just, the second group of people, that group I talked about, that third group of people are biochemically, they just can't do it. I mean, it's like an alcoholic, like they just can't have one and because they just get cravings for more. But there's about a third of the people that are called harmful users. And I call it a push alcoholic or a push a sugar addict. They're just so used to it, they don't even think about it because, like you said, it's in the food, right? It's not necessarily just in the sugar or the sweets. It's in the food, and so they gain about a pound a year every year out of college or high school, and now they're like 30, 40 pounds overweight. There's some health issues going on, and with a reset, so just a little bit. My only job in life is to get somebody to 90 days of abstinence because likely because of the food system, there are very few people worldwide who have ever experienced this, right? And so I get them to 90 days and then they can make their own decisions, right? They can decide if their skin is better, if their weight is better, if their health is better, if they're, what the most important like benefit that people tell me, months later after they've done this, it's not, and I've had hundreds of pound weight loss. I've had put, hundreds of people in type 2 diabetes remission. They just wiped out their type 2 diabetes. Lupus, rheumatoid arthritis is a paper tiger. There's no like everybody who gets off sugar stops hurting. Their hands and their knees
Yeah.
stop hurting. But the most important thing that they all brag about or they all like rave about is that their brain came back online. They started to remember better, focus better, anxiety was less, and they sleep better. Just a lot of changes in their brain. And that's they thought that that was just aging. Like they thought that they were just, getting a little older. That's not the case. I watch people transform before my very eyes on Zoom. They go from inarticulate, overweight kind of, and then they all of a sudden they're like blossoming, and then they're like, there's this articulate person. You can see their face thinning out. It's wild, really. But anyway, it really is a perfect storm. Okay. It happened in the tobacco industry when they used to have doctors advertise on television. And it's really, truly an evolutionary wrong turn. And it started with slavery and Great Britain and, the going from, a very inexpensive or a very expensive condiment to a staple, right?
Mm.
And then, it just culturally grew into this, and I have nothing against the sugar manufacturers or anything like that, because they are just doing their job, maximizing shareholder value. And so, now that we know, and since I've been doing these summits, I mean, in the last 3 years, 4 years, it's been this insane. Every single day, a new paper comes out about studies about sugar. And so now we're here like we were in the early 70s and 80s or 60s, 70s and 80s with tobacco. We're here, but thanks to you and me, like now people are starting to know about it. Like they still don't know about it. You can
Mm.
give this product to a baby. Nobody's going to be mad at you. Nobody's going to be like, don't do that. But and when you talk on my side of the fence to these thousands of people who have called me and worked with us, their lives have fundamentally been changed by the understanding that maybe the human body was not meant to have sugar. Maybe 10 million years of evolution has given us a body that was not supposed to have tobacco or sugar.
Yeah.
So anyway, it's
Yeah.
again, I get on my soapbox. Sorry.
No, you're absolutely right, and it is that in the mainstream, it's still not really known. Like you said, I've got kids as well. You talked about your experience, and other people find it so crazy that you don't let them have treats and things like that. And it's still although it's talked about a bit more with sugar, I think people still don't really understand it in the mainstream. Although, like you said, there's a lot of good information there. And there's people like Chris Palmer and Georgia Reed talked a lot about with sugar and mental health as well. So it's getting there,
Love
but like
those
you say,
guys.
we've got to keep pushing the message.
Love those guys. They've both been on the show, Chris a bunch of times.
Mm,
And I think that the mental health, there's well, actually, he's Scottish, but he lives in Great Britain. This guy's an up and coming star. His name is Ali Houston. You should get him on. He's really good, man. He's got an everyman's kind of, um, like he started out as a physicist, right? But he
mm,
was having mental issues, right? And and now he's completely, this is what he does for a living. He coaches people with all kind of bipolar, whatever it is, mental health issues through a kind of ketogenic or a diet change, just a basically reduction diet. He's really good. He used to have a partner. I think they broke up, but she's still around too. But forget her name, Rachel, I think. But yeah, no, the mental health part of it is to me now the most fascinating part,
mm.
the help that this does in people. I have a friend, I'm trying to get her to, she's been a vegetarian for her life, for whatever. She's overweight, she's depressed, right? And, I love her to death, but she just like, for me, it was always health. It was never, I mean, I love animals like the next guy, like whatever. It's not like, and I get the whole sentient being thing, and I don't want to hurt and whatever, but in reality, I just believe that the human body evolved to eat animal products, you know. And honestly, when I started the summit 7 years ago, 8 years ago, I was a vegetarian. And it was
Mm,
from these guys, these folks that I learned, um, and I started to experiment. One of the things I'd like to tell folks is I like to try and explain to them, Ryan, that um, like I call it living in process, and I actually stole that from a mentor of mine, but living in process, this N1, this citizen science thing, that the actual like transformation happens when you take control of your own body, mind, whatever, and then you experiment with this stuff. But the problem is with sugar is that no one's ever off it. So they never really kind of get that baseline. They never get a baseline to see what does this new supplement give me? What does eating meat give me? What does eating vegetables give me? Like how do I feel about it? The body is so working so hard. Like one of the symptoms of type 2 diabetes is frequent urination. And frequent urination is easy to explain is the body's working hard overtime to get the toxin out, the sugar out, right? And and so people never get to this place of baseline. That's like I said, my goal in life is to get you to 90 days so you can make your own decisions. So you make educated and baseline decisions about what your health should be. And then I tell them, look, if you want to try a whatever, spelt flour or some new supplement, then try, but try one at a time.
yeah.
But so you got to get this, people call it reset diets or elimination diets or whatever. But the difficulty is that there's this addiction component that no one wants to accept. Like,
Mm,
and that's kind of the value that we bring to the market. Over the decade that I've been doing this, it's come perfectly clear that this is identical. This is an addiction recovery program required, not a diet, not a exercise. It's not a food change thing. It's a mental, emotional, personal development thing.
yeah.
So yeah, it's a little bit different, but yeah,
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. Sugar's definitely an addiction. You see it in people, and it ticks all those boxes for an addiction. Um,
yeah,
I'm sure you haven't got time to go into loads of detail, but obviously you have your recovery program you do with people, and
yeah,
along with your summit. What
yeah.
could you give us like a basic overview of some of the steps that people go through in dealing with sugar addiction?
Yeah, I mean, again, the first thing is abstinence. And, a lot of people recoil a little there. If I told you to quit steak or broccoli or something for a month, okay, I like those things, but I can do it. But they're like freak out a little bit. Like, and
Mm,
there's physical stuff. Like, yes, you have to eat whole food. You have to shop on the outside of the grocery, not in the middle of the grocery store. You have to eat whole food, bags and boxes and cans and takeout are off the limit, off the menu for a little bit. Um, but you know, and I'm to at this point, it's just pattern recognition for us. I can pretty much tell, depending on your habit, if I've done a proper intake, I can tell where you're going to be on day 5, day 7, day 10. And, if I can like front run you and show you what's going to be happening and prove to you, like, how did you know that yesterday that I was going to be like this today? They get like, it's not that hard after a while, after I've done it, but most people don't like, they they think there's something else wrong with them. They like want to run off and get a SSRI. They want to run off and get a depression antidepressant medicine or something. They think they're freaking out. They start getting weepy and everything. So there's a lot of in the early days. So I did a 30-day detox, which I've redone 4 times because I've keep learning stuff. And that's recorded stuff. And then they have the support meetings, right? The support meetings are important because you get to see other people that are doing the same thing. No
mm,
judgment, no. And look, 80+% of the people that work with us do not even have spousal support. The spouse is not on board. They've changed the diet around the house 5 times and they failed 5 times and they don't want to do it. They're not on board to do it again one more time and quit sugar and flour. Like they're like, they're likely addicts if they're living with an addict. So there's a lot to get done in the first 30 days. There's a lot to it. And that's why I always tell people I built the company backwards because I knew we had to have the support stuff. It was like it didn't matter what I told you. There's an old book. It's got to be 25 years old, maybe 30, but it's called Change or Die. Okay. And it was mostly back then about sugar, about cigarettes, right? And what they found in a lot of studies is that fear doesn't work and facts don't work. So it doesn't matter what I tell you. It doesn't matter how much I tell you, you're going to die, whatever, or all the facts about science. It doesn't matter. That stuff doesn't matter, right? What does matter and what has the only thing that's ever worked in drugs and alcohol, it works in cancer. Like if you join a cancer support group, your chances of long-term survival go through the roof as opposed to the person who does it alone, right? And this is very well studied, very well, and diabetes, the same thing, all kind of support groups, breast cancer or whatever it is, doesn't matter, you know, definitely psychological therapy, but like I said, the only thing that ever worked in drug and alcohol. So this is a part, that some people aren't joiners, they don't want to do it, whatever. But it is kind of an important thing that that someone else is doing this too, and that you're not crazy. Because remember, people that call me, they're like, they have never told another soul, right? They tell me stories like they throw the cake in the garbage and then they come back an hour later and eat it, like pull it out of the garbage and eat it, right? And they think like I never heard this story before. Like they're horrified that they have done this and they've never told another person this. And I'm like, I've heard it hundreds of times, it's common. And this is kind of what gives the weight of how much sugar is affecting the brain. I've been very strong lately. And I believe this with all my heart now, is that, and the reason I know this is because people come back to me 5 months later, it's 10 months later, and they say, I can't believe I was thinking this way. Like when someone ends up on my doorstep, they likely are their frontal lobe, their nucleus accumbens, their control center has been so hijacked that they are not in a mental state to make the proper decisions they need for their health moving forward. They're just not. They're just not in that place. And they say to me like a month later, they say, they tell me that story about the garbage stuff, like if they haven't told me it yet. And then they tell me I went out in a snowstorm to get ice cream or something like that. You know what I mean? They tell me crazy stories that they think I've never heard, which leads me to believe that, in alcohol, they call it wet brain. You know what I mean? They have a term for it, like your cognitive stuff is off, right? You're just not properly operating, right? And so in this case, there is a hijacking, there is a need more for the substance than there is rational thought. You know what I mean? And so anyway, I'm getting away from the question, but the question, like, you got to get them detoxed. You got them get to understand some of this stuff. And I don't tell them about the addiction stuff at the beginning. 85% of people come to me for weight loss, right? That's what or whatever, diabetes, they get a diabetes, the doctor told them they got to quit, but they can't. But so I kind of ease them into it, right? And I'm telling them now, but so they, but I don't I don't tell them till about the 29th day. I say, ha ha, I tricked you. It's like, and then the long term, and we have meetings for that. It's like a separate set of meetings. The long term is more important. You've heard the statistics as well as I have. 85% of people who lose any amount of weight gain it all back in the first year or more. And it's really easy to explain if you kind of follow what we've been talking about here. Life is pretty good when you decided to start this process, right? Going okay, life's okay, finances, kids, everybody's okay. Well, about 4 months in, you've lost 40 pounds and you're like, your husband's being a pain or your job sucks. And then you just have one. And
Mm.
I've heard this story thousands of times. I just had one, and now I'm 40, I gained my 40 pounds back. So it's two things. The answer to your question is got to get your detox, got to understand it, got to get through it. Then we've got to work with you over a longer period of time, and you're in for life in these support groups. And that's what you got, that's got to be part of the process too. So two
Yeah.
parts.
Yeah, definitely. I think the support is really important. I think that also ties into, when they look at things like the blue zones. I know there's lots of fake stuff around blue zones, but one of the great things they have is community, which
Yes.
which helps with their health. So it makes sense that people need that social support and that's an important part of it. And I guess
Yeah.
your Quit Sugar Summit, I guess, is sort of along those lines as well. What was it that brought you to doing that?
Well, it was this lack of information out there, this misunderstanding of what the diet industry is a $78 billion industry in just the United States. It's enough money to feed the unfed world yearly, okay, that people are paying money to try and quote unquote lose weight. And so they were the brainwashing that's come from it is eat less, exercise more. But it's like the things that we've talked about in this, time period in this podcast is that there's other, it's not a, I don't know, you know what a bomb calorimeter is?
Yeah,
So a
yeah,
yeah, you know what it is, right? So a bomb calorimeter, for the folks that don't know, is that this is how you measure calories. It's a unit of heat, right? And it's been debunked. Calories, it's in your body, the way food interacts with it is a chemical reaction, not a heat reaction, you know what I mean? And so this idea that I got a coach who's an ultra marathoner, right? And she's in her 50s and she was is still running 100 miles a week, right? And she carried 15 still, right? Now, like they eat that goo or whatever, and they carb load and all this other crap. And so she got off the sugar, and those 15 pounds finally went away. You know what I mean? Because it has no, you cannot outrun this thing.
yeah.
You can't out exercise it. You can't. It's all um, mental, emotional, and biochemical. What's going on when you ingest these ultra processed carbohydrates? So.
Yeah.
You got to be careful there.
Yeah, no, definitely. I agree completely. What about one other thing I wanted to ask you was, is there much of a difference in terms of the effect that fructose versus glucose has on us? Because obviously there's these different types of sugar. What's the difference
I
between them?
I think you've done your research, my friend. I think you've done a great job, and you may have extended your stay with me too long here. But so my comment, the belief that you know, the big guy is Richard Johnson. Dr.
Mhm.
Lustig's pretty big on this too, but um, the offending molecule in this entire discussion is fructose. Okay. And fructose, and I've asked Lustig and I've asked Gary Fettke and I've asked all these guys to their face, some of them, is fructose a psychoactive drug? And, some of them answer quickly. Fettke and Lustig, they believe yes. But Richard Johnson, the real fructose guy, he's like, he's not 100% there. But I really believe that fructose is a psychoactive drug. Okay. And I could cite chapter and verse of the research if you want, but I always find that kind of boring. I actually have to move some of the summit speakers away from the deep molecular science stuff. They're like, people are just like fogging out. They're not like it's going over their head. They're not paying attention. Like they don't want to be in science class. They want to know how do I get off the shit, right? And so it's like, but at the end of the day, this intersection of addiction and health, the addiction and nutrition, if you will, is interrupted by fructose. So fructose was something that we were only afforded as an evolving species once or twice a year when the fruit was, and the molecule, here's the big thing. The molecule is exactly the same in fruit as it is in a candy bar. The molecule doesn't change, okay? It's the same molecule. And Johnson's research is very clear, and there's a cool movie out about chimpanzee and stuff, and it proves it out. Like animals go crazy when one of these trees or bushes is ripe. They will do risky things. They will go into in the movie in the kind of one of those animal things where it's really amazing. I think it's called Chimp Empire, Empire Chimp or whatever. And when this once a actually this tree only bloomed once every 2 or 3 years, right? And they went into other territories. They'll do risky things. They'll be impulsive, um, and it creates a foraging effect. Okay, bears eat 40,000 blueberries before they hibernate. The villi in your stomach, in your intestines, the thing that reaches out from the thing and pulls the nutrition into your body, get longer with fructose, get bigger with fructose. They want more of it, okay? Or they want more of this instant, easy energy, right? Nothing wrong with it. We were supposed to get it. If we found it, it was easier than tracking down an animal and killing it or whatever. It was just, and the same with honey, if you wanted to risk. So there was a few times a year you would be able to get this energy, right? But at the end of the day, it's the effect that the fructose has on your behavior. And over the long term, if you're doing it like 20 to 30 teaspoons a day. It's the dose makes the poison. For your folks, they don't realize half the table sugar molecule is glucose, half is fructose, right? This is a processed uh, neurotoxin, a drug that affects your nucleus accumbens and how you think and feel. And what happens is your entire behavioral pattern, if you will, changes when you ingest this product and you want more food and you feel a little bit calmer for about 20 minutes. And then, like any drug, you've got to either re-ingest or stop. And by the time you get to be an adult, you're just fighting off withdrawals. You're just fighting off not having it. Okay. So fructose is the reason this is a problem, okay? And great question and great ending if we got to go. But fructose is, I always tell people if you want to get off sugar, study fructose, okay? It's the most it's the thing that's affecting you the most in this behavioral change. Not necessarily because they say fructose doesn't jack up a glucose monitor or whatever, but mentally, emotionally, spiritually, dare I say, uh, it's fructose that's causing the problem.
Yeah. Absolutely. That's a lot of interesting stuff there for people to dig into. And
Yeah.
like you say, it's a great way to kind of bring it to the ending. I know I've taken a lot of your time, but listen, before you go though, what's for someone, if someone is, addicted to sugar or they're finally accepting it or they think they want to get off sugar, what's some of the first steps that you would recommend for them to take?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So the first step really is to, uh, I always say, if you go to sugaraddiction.com, you don't need to take the quiz. It's not my job to tell you whether you're an addict or not, Pretty much internally, everybody knows. But, you kind of review your life and say, like, everybody's tried every diet in the world, right? And it is that what happens is, strangely enough, all of our clients are women between 40 and 80, right? Or 40 and 90 even. I like to say 40, but it's really closer to 50 probably in the mean. And so they've just struggled over the years with diet, body image, weight loss, and all this kind of stuff. And they've narrowed it down to sugar being their Achilles heel. They've narrowed it down to sugar is the thing that keeps stopping them from whatever diet they're on. And so you just have to decide for yourself if that's the case, if sugar is causing you issues, um, and that you have a difficult time going 2 or 3 days even without it. And if that's the case, then you do need to get that reset. You need to think about at least a 30-day abstinence elimination process. And what happens, like I said earlier, is like the results of it are not necessarily, you might be losing some weight, you might be starving all the time, there might be some other withdrawal, but you're feeling weird. You're feeling off. You're feeling, period. End of story. You've taken away a self-soothing emotional management tool that you didn't even know you were using because it was so freely available all the time. You didn't think of it like you need a beer on a Friday because it was a rough week. You're just like, I think I could have a candy bar. It's like you haven't put the two to two together. So you have to raise your conscious level, like by journaling, and to understand that if you write it all down, how you were feeling just before you ingested and how you felt afterwards, and you start to see it on paper, then you can start to understand why you're so attracted to and why you can't stop it. And so the first thing to do is and this sounds too simple, but you have to accept that you may not be able to use it for at least a time to see. So it's that level of acceptance.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I think that's a big step that people take
Yeah.
when once you accept it. I guess that's the same with all addictions. You can really start to move forwards then. As well, before you go, let us know where we can find you, because obviously for anyone who's interested in getting off sugar, you're a great
Yeah.
resource. They can look at what you've got. So yeah, let us know where we can find you.
Yeah, it's sugaraddiction.com. Like I said, you don't need to take the quiz. You can just download the book. It's an Amazon bestseller, but we brought it home and give it away free now. Um, and the Quit Sugar Summit, depending on when this airs, is January the 6th. It's early January every year, but this year it's on January the 6th, so you can check that out and just you know, it gives you a broad overview of a lot of stuff, this and like that. So there's a lot of, and just Google the Sugar Free Man or Mike Collins Sugar Addiction, you'll find me. I'm out there, YouTube everywhere. So
Yeah. Yeah, awesome. Listen, thank you so much for your time. I've really enjoyed it. I've learned a lot. I'm sure everyone else has too. So, thank you again for coming on.
well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
No problem at all. And thank you everyone else for listening. We will see you again next week for another episode. And until then, let's get optimal together.